Hi, my name is Bruce Bolger, and I'm the founder of the Enterprise Engagement Alliance, and we're dedicated to helping organizations put the principles of stakeholder management to work in their organizations. And to us, stakeholder management is really little more than total quality management for people. And as part of our program, we give away a lot of information and we share a lot of information with people like Jon McGowan, who is one of the world's experts, and certainly in the United States, one of the world's experts in ESG reporting. We're going to talk with him in just a second here. If my computer will cooperate, I'm going to advance the slide. And if not, I'm going to just end the slide because I am having a technical problem here and I don't want to waste your time. So in any case, our organization I am now going to stop this share. The Enterprise Engagement Alliance, as I said, is a not for, it's a for-profit but doesn't make money organization that's dedicated to sharing these principles. And we have shows with people like Jon McGowan to talk about various issues. And today the issue is sustainability reporting. We're going to talk to Jon about the state of sustainability reporting in Europe and in the United States. And then we're going to take the time to talk a little bit about the philosophy of sustainability reporting and whether compliance is such a great idea. But anyway, Jon, thanks again for taking a half hour of your day today. First off, what is the state of the European Union corporate sustainability, the corporate sustainability reporting directive? There's talk that it may get slowed down, that there's some reservations about its complexity. Could you give us an update on that?
Well, thank you for having me on. And contrary to what you normally do with like a video, I'm going to timestamp this a little bit and say this is December 4th because this is so time sensitive. Everything is moving so quickly that what we say today could change in a week at sometimes. But what's happening in the European Union is there's been a shift politically. They had elections over the summer for European Parliament. It shifted to the right, not significantly, but enough. And the election over there was based heavily on kind of anti-green rhetoric, anti-climate change rhetoric, blaming climate change regulations and environmental regulations for the EU struggling in the world economy. Um, it was successful. It caused a shift, and as a result, the incoming commission and the incoming parliament are taking another look at some of the regulations that came out of the European Green Deal. Those regulations, specifically relating to sustainability and businesses, you're looking at the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, and the Taxonomy. Those three they're going to start taking a look at. About middle of November, the president of the European Commission, who actually was the president last year or last term when all these things went into effect, she came out and stated that she'd been working with the council, and the council wants to uh, clean it up and make it a little more simple. That they've been getting complaints that from the business community, that it's just an overburdensome regulation. And we've seen this trend with comments that have been made by national leaders and by representatives in the European Union, where they want to go through and they're feeling that it's creating too much of a burden, and that it's not that they disagree with the concept of it, but the implementation was a little bit too much. So they're
Jon,
going to
let me
come
get a
out.
little bit more specific. From what I have read, the biggest objections, but tell me if I'm wrong, seem to be related to the climate elements, that the attacks related to the social, the human capital issues seem to have been less resounding. Am I wrong on that?
No, you're correct. But I think that comes down to how the EU treats the S and ESG as opposed to the way the US has treated it. In the EU, it's primarily a human rights issue as far as like slave labor, good wages. What are you doing down your value chain to make sure you're not violating international law? In the US, it kind of became political. It became about LGBTQ. It came about women's rights and Black Lives Matter, and that just wasn't a factor over there. So while we in the U.S. were debating the S of ESG, they're debating the E, the environmental aspect of it.
Well, and oh, but here's what's something very interesting, John. Thank you. This is new to me, what you're saying in a way. What actually struck me with the law is, yes, it doesn't get involved with those issues that in this country are lightning rods. But what it does do that's unique is that it talks about all stakeholders. It talks about not just your employees, it talks about your consumers, it talks about your distribution and supply chain partners and communities. So there's a holistic approach to it that doesn't exist. And we're going to talk about the US in a minute, where the US really doesn't look at it that way. And then to your point, they're really more focused on the risks and the opportunities that are created for those stakeholders and how companies measure them and what are they doing to mitigate the risks. So it's really not about telling companies what they have to do. And please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm kind of asking you. It's not telling them what they have to do. It's saying, look, this is the information. It's material to these issues. Just what are you doing that creates risks? What are you doing that creates opportunities? And what are the metrics you're using? And what are you doing to mitigate it? Am I wrong that that's kind of the unique element of that law?
No, you're right. It is. I mean, it is truly a. Well, I guess it depends on which law you're talking about because
Well, I'm
there's
talking about the CS,
RD.
RD.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the CSRD is just about reporting. So it doesn't require action. It doesn't require companies to do anything. It is just about gathering the data, putting it out there, and making it available to your consumer, to your investors. If you're a publicly traded company, to the fund managers. But if you're a privately held company, it's your consumers, and then making it available to the government. So it is not about anything other than gathering information, and it is very heavily focused on climate change over there. It's greenhouse gas emissions is the majority of it, and it's a scope 1, 2, and 3, which is for your listeners who maybe not don't realize that scope 1 is what your company actually emits. Like what does your building do? What is you driving around do? Scope 2 gets into your energy provider, like how much greenhouse gases are being emitted by your electric company in order to get the electricity to you. And the electric companies provide that anyhow. That's an easy one to gather. But scope 3 is the problem, and that gets into your value chain. What kind of greenhouse gas emissions are your suppliers emitting? And then what kind of sort of greenhouse gas emissions are your consumers emitting? And that's when it gets really, really difficult. And you're really kind of just, you've got to make a lot of educated guess of what's happening there. But yeah, so this for the CSRD, that one is very very much just a reporting standards. When you pull into the CS3D, that you start getting into obligations.
Now that, just to tell, why don't you tell everybody that's the due diligence for your supply chain? Is that the one that you think is getting a lot more flack or getting more flack than the CSRD?
Yes, so it's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It basically it creates an additional reporting standard where you've got to do different. Like it's not just the gathering information, but you got to make sure you're doing a due diligence to make sure that your suppliers are not violating environmental law or human rights laws. But the interesting thing is it does create a legal liability, and that kind of got missed. Is that you can actually it creates an ability for people that are adversely impacted to bring legal challenges against companies who violate the due diligence aspect of it. That's where you're starting to see pushback on it. That one was the last of the three to get enacted. The taxonomy came first. The CSRD came in like 2022 originally, and they're still rolling it out in phases as far as the implementation. But the CS3D was just adopted beginning of 2024, and that was in the gear up to the elections as well. And it became a very hot topic. They reduced the scope of it, made it basically just apply to major companies as opposed to the small and medium-sized enterprises they originally wanted. But it's still got a broad scope on it. And I think that fight flipped back into why we're seeing this, what they're calling an omnibus bill, where they're going to go through and look at the taxonomy, the CSRD, and the CS3D, and rather than have them be three different things that were implemented over 6 years. Now they're going to go back and look at it in one big piece and see what they can do to make this really streamline the reporting standards so that you're not having to do a separate report for each different directive. Now it's just a single report that fulfills all the needs of all three directives. Um,
That might make sense. Taxonomy,
yeah.
please explain for our viewers what that original taxonomy regulation was.
Yeah, so that one really, I mean, if you look at it in the trilogy, that one created the definitions. So that was the one that described what are green activities and what are environmentally friendly activities, and what it gets into the greenwashing aspect, which if you're not from, I know you're familiar with it, but for a listener, greenwashing is when you make a claim that you're doing something that's environmentally friendly, and you go and publicize and tell everybody how environmentally friendly you are, but it doesn't really do anything. It's like hotels that tell you we're not going to, don't wash your towels. It'll be friendly to the environment. And they really just don't want to wash your towels.
Hmm.
Or, and and so you're seeing a lot of regulation in that, which is separate of these three. But that defined what actions were considered environmentally friendly. And when a business kind of was the starting point of the definitions, then the other two led off of that.
So I think it's safe to say, moving away from the European scene to the US and Canada, and some other issues, that the law is not going to go away. It's going to remain. It's going to be there. It's in effect. Companies are going to have to comply. But as you say, it's a moving target, and it's very likely that there are going to be some elements of simplification and streamlining over time, but it ain't going away. Is that kind of the summary?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
So now let's just saw it right on my screen, coincidentally, providentially, the new SEC chair candidate was just announced, a gentleman named Paul Atkins. I don't know anything about him, other than that my little blurb at the screen said that he's certainly going to push to reduce regulation. I think it's pretty safe to say that a lot of people, and I was skeptical all along that Jay Gensler was going to get into human capital, any more changes on human capital disclosures. I think it's pretty safe to say that's gone. There will be no more push for human capital disclosures beyond what Jay Clayton did. Wouldn't you say?
I agree. Yeah, that's accurate. We're going to see Trump administration is going to be slowing down a lot of these initiatives and reversing a lot of them too. So you're not going to see a lot of movement at the federal level for the next 4 years.
And by the way, the change in the SK the 10K disclosures were so minimal. So the reports that have come out of that were just as the opponents had predicted. They're just a lot of them are greenwashing. But anyway, but there is something interesting on the state level. Or is there anything going on in the state level? Or would you say that the overall appetite for sustainability reporting in general has really been set back, that the anti-woke, and we're nonpartisan, but I actually agree with some of the anti-woke stuff because I think a lot of the reporting was virtue signaling. But do you think that the climate, no pun intended, for sustainability reporting in the US is probably from at least from a legislative or a regulatory standpoint, probably on hold generally?
At least at the national level, for sure. What you're going to see is, with the change of the SEC, the climate risk disclosure rule is they're going to let that die. You're going to see some of the other regulations that have been going on at a national level probably be rolled back. Maybe the ERISA rule with the Department of Labor will be reversed back to what it was under Trump in the first term. At the state level, there has been California is a good bellwether for this because they were the first one to come out with sustainability or climate reporting. It's not ESG. It's really just climate reporting for them at the state level. And as soon as it came out, Newsom said he didn't think it was possible to implement it in the time frame they wanted. And they were trying to mimic what they thought the SEC was going to do, and then beat the SEC and the reporting standards. They also include scope 3, which the SEC did not. And then the last legislative session, they delayed the implementation for a year. Let me rephrase that. They didn't delay the implementation for a year. They tried to delay it for a year. but they delayed the release of the rules by 6 months. So they, something like this, your legislative body, your Congress, your Parliament, or in here your state house, they draft a law and then they kick it off to another agency to actually write the details. That agency in California was supposed to release it on January 1 of 2025, and they've been given a 6 month delay. So they're not going to release it till July 1 of 2025. Problem with that is uh, the reporting requirements actually are for fiscal year 2024. Companies start reporting in 20, I'm sorry, in, I mixed my years up. So the financial reporting begins in 2026 for fiscal year 2025. And if a company runs a calendar year, fiscal year, they're going to go 6 months of operating where they don't know what the standard is going to be and what the reporting standard is going to be and what they need to gather and what they have to put together. So they're just going to completely guess and have to operate for 6 months before you even get to see it. And then people in the financial industry understand that any sort of new regulation is going to take a couple months at least to draft your internal policies. So we're talking a lot of these companies aren't going to be able to adapt till September. So I expect that in the 2025 legislative session in California, they're going to delay it a year. But I just don't know how they could not. But they decided not to do it. Newsom asked them to do it, and it delayed. But you're still seeing in New York, Illinois, Michigan, state level proposals to require reporting.
So let's kind of move now to the last part of this show, to the voluntary reporting, because as you know, over the last 7 or 8 years, there have been efforts at voluntary reporting, GRI, right, the Global Reporting Initiative, and there's been talk about consolidating these voluntary, disclosure requirements. Then for a while, the World Economic Forum had come out with these so-called stakeholder management metrics. I frankly haven't heard anything more about them. When the Business Roundtable made their 2019 pronouncement about, their commitment to addressing the needs of stakeholders without ever really defining what that meant. How do you run a company, John, with, oh, who am I going to make happy today, right? Wait a minute. So I don't think that was a very well rolled out announcement, even though it sounded nice. But it seems to me that even the movement for voluntary sustainability reporting seems to be kind of really cooled down, that whole period of fervor has kind of calmed down, and that the push for this type of reporting is not really happening on the voluntary level that it was before. Am I wrong, or would you say that's kind of correct, or what?
I think that's correct. A lot of it was the new exciting toy, and everybody wanted to do it, and it was the trendy thing to do to go out and create your sustainability report or your ESG report. And to be clear, I mean, some version of these reports have existed for a while. These aren't, it's not a new concept. It's just that in 2020, 2021, they just became standard. Every company, privately held, publicly traded, you name it, they wanted to put out a sustainability report. And there was no measure for what was in it. I mean, you could go through and look at them, and every single one was completely different. None of them were actually doing anything about their greenhouse gas emissions, which is what the reports are legally turning into. But the voluntary ones were just, we participated in a gay rights parade, or
Yeah.
we hired this many women this year and we got this made up award. And like I thought the legal field was full of made up awards where you just buy them, like that's, I'm the, like all my colleagues, we get into award season, everybody's like, I'm a lawyer of distinguishment or whatever. And then I get it. It's like, if you pay us $1,000, well, you can tell people you're that. But the climate change industry and the sustainability industry had its own wave of that, where it was just made up names and made up recommendations. And people were flouting, just, hey, look at what we did and look how great we are as a company. And it was a marketing tool. And it worked as a marketing tool until it didn't. And that's where the anti-woke movement kicked in. And you got DeSantis as the, go woke, go broke, and everything that happened in Florida, where I'm located, where you've got all this legislation going on. It became no longer an asset; it became a liability. And then when you take it from a marketing piece and and now you add that liability and you add that the fact they're doing reporting standards, you got to be more careful what you put into it. So it's no longer the fun new toy, it's a job, and it's something you got to do the right way, and it's an obligation. So that's why it adversely impacts the voluntary ones, because they don't quite know what to do. How do you thread that needle of appeasing whoever you're trying to appease, um, and put that into a document and then send it to somebody like me who tells you to burn it? And they're, like it's just it's trying to find the right way to do it. And I think that's part of what's been the political pushback is what slowed it down, but also, as I said, to be careful what you ask for with the climate activists and sustainability activists and people that want these sort of things happening. They got it, but the result wasn't what they were expecting, and that it's created something where people are putting information into documents, or now they don't want, like you're just providing information. It doesn't require any action. And now it's just feel good or checking a box. And so that kills that, doesn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, which was to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by, well, some of them want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by companies. And nothing in this mechanism does that. It just adds a financial burden. And the only people that are gaining anything from this are the consultants. And
The marketing agencies who
yeah,
caused the problem to begin with by, in
I
my view, and nobody did it intentionally, but it's just what you said. It all became virtue signaling. It
Mhm.
did. It became virtue signaling. And you would read these reports and you'd go, who would read these reports? Who cares? You
Yeah,
really care that you gave money to that local African American group? Who cares? Is it aligned to your organization's principles? What are you accomplishing? So, yeah, I think there was a very legitimate pushback. But let me ask you about this. And we have a few more minutes here. A lot of companies apply to get a Great Places to Work award, or they get LEEDs certification for their buildings. It would seem to me that the Europeans are on to something with the concept of having and they actually, the CSRD law has been called by some the anti-greenwashing law, right? Creating a standardized format for reporting of information, right? What opportunities and risks am I creating for my stakeholders and for the community and for the environment? What am I doing to mitigate them? Et cetera, et cetera. How am I measuring that? Et cetera, et cetera. Um, and then you have it audited by the same people that audit your financials. To me, Jon, there's if you let me ask you this, and I know you're an attorney, you're not a CEO, you're not a businessman per se. But if you're a company that's really proud of how you run your company, you've got a clear purpose, goals, objectives with values that are well articulated, like Patagonia. They may not be doing well, but you know what they stand for.
right.
And then you have, clear objectives and goals. These are the returns that we blah, blah, blah. And then you reveal if you're proud of what you do, you don't mind sharing what you do, right? So isn't the opportunity uh, for sustainability reporting is if you're a great company, it's a better way to prove it than by going out and paying somebody to give you an award, as you said, or paying, a great places to work. I'm not going to knock the organization. It's very nice, but it doesn't tell you about what the company does, doesn't say. So it seems to me, and this is sort of my last question, isn't isn't in a sustainability reporting an opportunity for great companies?
Yes. And I'll tell you a kind of interesting story. How I ended up writing for Forbes was I was I'd floated an op-ed at one point that was arguing that Republicans should be in favor of sustainability reporting too. And it's because it gives businesses this opportunity to showcase where their priorities are. And yes, Patagonia can go out and showcase how low their greenhouse gas emissions are and what they're doing to protect the environment. But on the other side of it, it doesn't just have to be marketed to the people that care about that. There are Republicans that will not shop at a place that's going to prioritize certain things. And you could put that in a sustainability report and showcase that you're on the other side of the issue. And if there's a money to be made in there, go for it, put it out there. But ultimately, you're right. It does fix the greenwashing issue. It does, which is becoming a real problem. And that's a real concern for climate activists where people are making claims that aren't substantiated. But for companies that want to go out and showcase that this is what they care about, this is what they do, and as long as it aligns with their vision, aligns with their, their profit and how their business is functioning, it's a good idea. Because you're right, Patagonia, Disney company got into it and got out of it, and they can't figure out where they want to be. But a lot of companies, there's an advantage to it. You just can't do it because you want to do it. You got to make a decision that this is going to be part of your strategic vision, and there's got to be a balance on that, because there's a real risk. This could turn into a 30-minute conversation instead of a 2-minute conversation, but there's a real risk that if what you're doing is actually adversely impacts your investors, you're breaching your fiduciary duty. And I've written a law review article about that, where when you look at it, it's got to be towards that goal of pushing the company forward and towards that
Well,
goal.
but isn't it really, John? And again, we could talk for hours on this. And as you know, there's also that's why B corporations were created in
Right.
37 states. And by the way, B corporations are basically statutes, folks, that allow corporations to be a little bit to get out of that fiduciary responsibility by stating what their purpose is. And by the way, half of the states that have B corporate statutes are Republican. So to your point, these are not, and this is what's so conservatives should be jumping on sustainability and stakeholder capitalism because it's first off the golden rule. I mean, that's a kind of a fundamental thing. But secondly, transparency and integrity. Which anyway, to me, I'm very surprised. If I were an active conservative group, I would be embracing stakeholder capitalism because it makes capitalism better. But anyway, getting to your point here about I think the answer to this is that if you don't have sustainability in that broad context of climate and people built into your business operating system, don't even publish a sustainability report. In other words, you shouldn't be, in me, the sustainability report should be a reflection of what you're already doing. It
Mhm.
should not be a new thing like DEI that, oh, we're going to put that in the corner office over here. No, if DEI or sustainability are not part of your business operating system, wouldn't you suggest it's maybe not a good idea to even talk about it?
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. You've got to be, these reports aren't about creating, let's say, they're not an effective tool for marketing the way people have been trying to use it. And it's not about creating a fake image of what your company does. It's about accurately reporting what your company does. And you've got to be accurate in it. If you're not accurate in it, you're going to start running afoul of some of these laws, especially at the international level. I mean, Canada's the one
Let's
to
end
watch.
with Canada. Let's end with Canada. We're really done. But Canada, just tell us about that new anti-greenwashing law in Canada and give us your thoughts and we'll close out.
Yeah, they kind of snuck it in. It came out of nowhere. People weren't watching, and then suddenly it was very strict requirements on what you can claim in your marketing materials on your website as far as what you're doing, any sort of green claims. And any sort of claim you make that says you're climate friendly, reduces green, whatever you claim, has to be backed by a reputable group that meets some sort of international standard. The problem was they don't know what the international standard is yet. They've got to figure it out. But it really clamped down on any sort of green claims. And the EU is working on very similar legislation too. So you're going to see it here, and those are both going to impact U.S. companies. So a U.S. company with any presence in Canada that puts on their website that they're climate friendly and have no basis for that, you can't say climate friendly anymore. You have to be very specific. Like this reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 10%. That's the level they're looking for out of Canada. And it happened quietly. Nobody knows what's going on. A lot of companies panicked up there and just scrubbed their website of anything green or climate friendly. Um, they're going through the implementation process. It was one of those laws that they passed it and made it effective immediately, but then they're having to backtrack and go through and draft the implementation law. But and the interesting thing about Canada is all it takes is just a couple of Canadian citizens to file a complaint. It's
And they're
and
big
then
fines.
yeah,
I mean,
it's
big.
yeah, I think it's God. I don't want to just guess, but I want to say it's like 10% of your annual gross income for the year. Like it was a really high number. I mean, and Lululemon's the one that's really getting the attention because they filed complaints against them earlier, and it before the law passed. Now the law's there, and before the law passed, I don't think they were in violation. Now maybe, it's stricter. So it's I mean it's a could up to a big fine.
Well, and as you're saying, it may come to Europe. I doubt not to the US right now, at least not on a national level. But one other point on that, though, it's only climate, right? It does, you can make any claims about how well you treat your customers and employees. I believe the law is only climate, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Pretty much everything outside the US has been focused primarily on climate change and greenhouse gases or the environment, broadly the environment.
Well, with the exception of CSRD, I think
Yeah.
that does include a lot of human rights issues and
Mhm.
related people issues. And it actually gets into things like keeping your promises in the consumer area. And it even gets into things like, what are your terms? So you can, if you want to pay your supply chain in 90 days, you can, but they want to know. So John, you've been so generous with your time. Everyone, if you don't read Forbes, his column is terrific. Every time I see it, I read it, and I'm not even a climate guy. I'm really more on the S of ESG. But nonetheless, John, thank you for your terrific work. Thanks for your time today. This show will be up on our YouTube channel next week. We'll have a feature article also, John, that summarizes it for people who don't want to sit through a half-hour interview. So thanks again, John, and have yourself a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.